And welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that is so hipster we were into it before it even existed. Case in point, today we're gonna show up all those posers with their stupid little smartphones and tablets and show everyone how the real hardcore dorks make complete clueless asses of themselves in public. So, with that in mind, we've got ourselves a double header of mobile devicey goodness today. And first up, we're going to take a look at the first significant stab at an e-reader, namely the Sony Data Discman. And then after that, we're going to take a look at the kinda sorta forerunner to the smartphone, namely the Apple Newton. Believe it or not, there had been tentative stabs at mechanical books and such as far back as the late 1940s. First came Spanish schoolteacher Angela Ruiz Robles's unreleased compressed air-powered mechanical encyclopedia. Then there were attempts at sharing complete texts over an early version of the internet during the 70s, which ultimately became the still ongoing Project Gutenberg. But it took until 1990 for the first stab at what we would now call an e-reader to come to fruition. This was the Sony Data Discman, which didn't make it out of Japan until late 1991. The Data Discman ran on 3-inch CDs, usually enclosed in a distinctly diskette-like case. These discs were capable of handling, if Sony's marketing materials are to be believed, up to 100,000 pages of text or 32,000 less than stellar images. You could also play those 3-inch music CDs on most models, just don't expect audio and images or searchable text at the same time. These things couldn't handle true multimedia. Anyway, in the non-shock of the century, most of the materials available for the Data Discman were things like public domain book compilations, pocket translators, encyclopedias, and the odd periodical like the official airline guide. Eventually, users were able to burn their own CDs for use in this thing, but by then, standard CD-ROM had taken over, to the point where drives were starting to appear on laptop computers, which you could, actually do productive things on. Though I can't find anything definitive, it looks like the Data Discman somehow held on until 2000. It really blows my mind to think that this thing somehow lasted for a whole decade. I'd never heard of this, never seen any of the software, nothing. And more importantly, I get the feeling I'm not alone here. But anyway, let's take a look at the Data Discman. So anyway, a few months ago I was trolling the thrift stores and I found this rather sad-looking box for something called an electronic book player. And of course this turned out to be the Data Discman, and you can see it sort of in life there. But anyway, I wound up having a bit of an adventure with this one. So anyway, at the store, I plugged this in and I was able to get the screen to light up. And getting to the screen is not the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. And it's just a plain black and white LCD screen, nothing special. And I was able to get the light with this switch to turn on and off. And I noticed that it had a video output, and I could also run audio from it. So I figured, well, hell, I can get this to power up. I'll take the gamble. So I brought it home, plugged it into the TV, and as I'm sure you've gathered by now, that worked just fine. But initially everything was in Japanese, whether there was a disc in it or no disc. And to add insult to injury, the only disc that came with it was this one. And that's in Japanese too. So what I wound up doing was I had to just drag myself kicking and screaming into the 21st century and use a real honest to God smartphone and use the Google Translate slash camera app to figure out what the hell I was looking at. And I took a few screenshots. So take a look. So, not particularly wanting to have to spend inordinate amounts of time with the app to try and figure out what I was looking at, I figured I would just go on good old Fleabay and try and find some more software for this, which turned out to be a rather difficult task. I found absolutely zero titles for the Data Discman for sale. And also, believe it or not, as I've mentioned before, this could also play 3-inch music CDs. Out of the 2,000 plus CDs I own, I have never owned a single 3-incher. And so this meant having to buy one of those too, just to test the audio. But anyway, I found this entry in Rhino Records' short-lived Lil Bit of Gold series from the late 80s, and I already had these songs on a regular Les Paul and Mary Ford CD, so kind of redundant. But it was $1 for the disc and $3 for the shipping. But anyway, getting back on topic here, it took me a while, but I was eventually able to find some more software for this, but only by purchasing another unit, which just happens to be the same model, pure coincidence. And the seller was selling some software bundled with that other data Discman. In a somewhat cruel twist, this new one's screen is every bit as dead as the old one. But I can still hook it up to the TV. But anyway, I guess that doesn't bode too well for the survival rate of these things. But anyway, I feel like with getting that second data Discman, that I've been able to accrue in one fell swoop, a decent cross-section of the software available for this thing. And here it is. So anyway, I'll let you decide if this was worth $550 plus another $20 to $50 per software title in $1992. For me personally, call me a Luddite, but I think I'd be happier with just a good old-fashioned book. Today's other item is one that I remember hearing about at the time and seeing on TV a couple of times, but I never saw one in person until I acquired one fairly recently. And of course, that is the Apple Newton, which was the first significant stab at a PDA, personal digital assistant. But let me go on just a little bit of a tangent here. So, back in the late 90s, maybe the very early 2000s, I remember my father was assigned this handheld device by an employer, and it was called the Palm Pilot. And I think we can safely call it a spawn of the Newton. Just go and look it up if you've never seen one. But anyway, he hated the damn thing, and I can't say I really blame him. He only used it when he absolutely had to, and this is because almost everything he could do with that Palm Pilot, he could do a lot more quickly and easily with just a good old pen and paper, and could keep it a little more organized too, even just, with a few sheets of paper in his shirt pocket. But getting back to the Newton, let's see if this sucker does anything at all to make my life a little easier.
I think the part that excites me the most
has to do with helping people keep in touch.
The idea behind Newton is that it's an assistant, something that actively helps you as you capture, organize, and communicate your ideas and information.
The possibilities are just limitless.
Apple Computer did some rather odd things during those years when Steve Jobs was out of the picture. Among them were the Power CD, a rebranded Philips CD player that could also read photo CDs, the QuickTake, an early Mac-dependent digital camera, the Pippin, a stab at a video game console, and most famously, the Newton. Starting as early as 1986, then CEO John Sculley had been kicking around the idea of a tablet computer known as the Knowledge Navigator. This computer was equipped with, as of 2017, still unheard of levels of artificial intelligence. Dialing down the unattainable goals a bit, Apple ultimately went to work on a more or less fully functioning handheld computer, which became the Newton, as in Sir Isaac Newton and the apple that hit him on the head.
You'll need to connect your Newton to a Newton fax modem to send a fax or electronic mail. And you have to first set up an email account before you can send email.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, Apple was able to work out things like modem connectivity fairly easily. As in, you still had to have peripherals and access to things like phone lines. But, of course, the biggest idea of the Newton was the ability to recognize users' handwriting. And this also proved to be its biggest stumbling block, and ultimately its undoing. It took until August of 1993, and not to mention a competing handheld, but the first Newton, i.e. the MessagePad 100, was introduced, complete with, in all reality, unfinished software, most infamously the underdeveloped handwriting recognition. Now, to Apple's credit, they continued to refine the Newton OS and issued new hardware. Did I mention that the Newton name is a bit of a misnomer? But the damage had already been done, and adoption was mostly confined to hardcore tech geeks. Upon Steve Jobs' return to Apple in 1997, one of the first things he did was discontinue the Newton. The last ones rolled off the line in early 1998. This is the second Newton released, and I'm just using the Newton name generically, of course. Specifically, this is the MessagePad 110, and this was introduced in the spring or summer of 1994, and I believe discontinued sometime in early to mid-95. And it, at one point, was capable of email and faxing, and I have had absolutely zero success with either. And for the record, I do have a modem for this thing and a phone line. They both came with it. But unfortunately, this modem is only for the original MessagePad. I don't know if you'll be able to read that, but just trust me. And it's just as well, because I couldn't get this stupid thing to so much as power up, let alone do anything. So total no-go no matter what. And also, you're supposed to be able to send information wirelessly to other Newtons with the IR sensor on the front here. And believe it or not, I don't know anyone else who owns a Newton, and I've only got this one, so I couldn't test that. And then there were rechargeable battery packs and a charger for these things, and I do have both, but I didn't really want to deal with 20-year-old battery packs. That just seemed kind of silly. And it came with an AC adapter, so I was able to do most of my testing that way. And I can also use just standard old double A's in this thing, so I'll do that for the test, just in the name of keeping the junk levels as low as possible. But anyway, I'm sure you'd like to see me screw around with this thing and see what kind of absolutely hilarious non sequiturs it can throw at me, but after reading the manual and watching some period how-to videos for these things on YouTube, I got the feeling that almost no one online has ever really attempted to teach their Newton how to function properly. And as I've implied, you can teach this thing new words and try and get it to learn your handwriting quirks, and both involve such a small bit of the screen and take so long that it would be a totally pointless, thankless task for me to attempt, but just trust me, you can. Look it up. And anyway, and this is not one of my little jokes, by the way, I really have honestly tried to pump a bunch of words in here because the built-in word bank is just pathetic. And I've tried to get it accustomed to my fabulously awful handwriting, especially my beyond abysmal cursive. So let's try and give this thing a fair shake. Alright, for starters, I, unsurprisingly, had to teach the Newton my name. Imagine that, it didn't know Minot. But weirdly enough, I also had to teach it the word oddity. So let's see what I can get. And I am kind of hugging the camera here, so I'll do my best. Ben. Let me try and be a little neater here. Alright, success. Now for the hard part. Alright. Success. Okay, let's try Oddity Archive. Alright, success. That E might not work. Nope, it got it. Alright. Alright, let's challenge this thing. Let's do cursive. Ben. Bar. Okay, let's try my last name. And I'm being a tad neater than I normally am with my signature. Ministry. Bar Ministry. Hilarious. Okay, let's try Oddity Archive in cursive. Arrive. Oddity Arrive. Yeah, it ain't perfect. Come on. Oh, come on. So as I kind of sort of mentioned in the history lesson, the Newton faced a bit of a backlash over its not so great handwriting recognition, and with that came two wrong phrases that became fairly famous. And one came from the Doonesbury comic strip in which the words catching on became egg freckles. And then more famously, The Simpsons beat up Martin became eat up Martha. So let's try these. Let's start with catching on. Catching punctuation doesn't quite cut it. Let's try it one more time. Alright. I seem to be teaching it fairly well. Okay, let's do the famous one. Beat up Martin. Beat up Marti. Not quite. Let's try it one more time. Beat, my B is really bad there. Beat up matter. Damn. Alright, let's try it from the other perspective. Let's try egg freckles. Egg freshlet. One more time. Maybe I can be a little neater. Let's do all lowercase. Egg freckles. Egg freckles. All right. Okay. Now I really want eat up Martha to become beat up Martin. So let's try eat up eat up Martha. Damn. Oh well. Come on. Alright, last test here. Let's see how well this thing responds to Apple's own product names. So, how about message pad? And do it as it's written. So... Of course. How about Apple Newton? Apple Newton. Yeah, of course you know it. Macintosh? Is as best. Host, whatever. Host. Let's just try and give the wrong words back and see what it gives us. So, host. H off. I feel like it's telling me off. Okay, off. Can we do off? Off. Maybe it's a good time to turn this off. Oh well. It is sort of trainable, at least. Well, I guess if you're willing to spend half your life teaching your Newton new words and having to correct its way too frequent mistakes and having to manually corral your text into something resembling coherent sentences, and then having to navigate the really awful filing system, which I didn't even really get into here, and then not to mention having to lug around a bunch of extra batteries and accessories and always having to be within reach of a phone jack for most of the communication stuff. I guess the Newton is okay. I think this thing's true calling was for people that are into really weird, unintentional Mad Libs. I've given this speech before. The Newton, and this certainly applies to the Data Discman as well, we've got the seeds of good ideas in here, and with all these years of hindsight, we know that better things came of this, but you just have to love it for historical reasons as opposed to practical ones. Kind of sounds like most of the tech episodes, doesn't it? Anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join us next time when I forget my lines. Good thing I wrote it down. Excuse me. Okay. Well, fools 1+, for Todd A's naive eye. Join a next fine when I boots only 182948 ice play Airdala Digital. That cannot be right.
Don't get too far ahead of Newton as it converts your handwriting to text. And don't pause in the middle of writing a word. If you pause in the middle of a word, Newton thinks that you're finished and tries to read it. And when you've finished writing a word, don't go back to correct or improve your handwriting if Newton hasn't read it yet.